Montana, 1887. There is a kind of quiet that is not peace. It is the quiet of a room too large for its occupant, the quiet of a field that has waited too long for rain, the quiet of a heart that has stopped expecting an answer to its call. Elias Thorne knew this quiet. It was the dust in the sunlight shafts of the front parlor, a room he had not entered in 5 years. It was the second cup he no longer set on the breakfast table. It was the hollow echo of his own footsteps on the porch boards. His wife, Martha, had once declared were as solid as the mountains themselves. He had lived on this ranch for 30 years, carving a life from the unforgiving beauty of the land. He and Martha had built it together, their laughter and their arguments woven into the very timber of the house. They had buried a son in the small plot under the cottonwoods and had held each other through the long winter of that grief. Then, 6 years ago, he had buried Martha there too, and the winter had come to stay. Now Elias was 52, a man still strong, his hands calloused and capable, his shoulders still broad enough to carry a heavy load. But the load he carried was invisible. It was the weight of memory, the arithmetic of loss. He had one son, one wife, and now he had zero. The math was simple and brutal. He had stopped arguing with it. His days fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the needs of his cattle. He rose before dawn, the chill of the house a familiar companion. His dog, a gray-muzzled shepherd mix named Blue, would lift his head from the hearth, his tail thumping a soft, steady beat against the floorboards. Blue was the only other heartbeat in the house, a silent witness to Elias's slow retreat from the world. They would work the day, mending fences that seemed to break of their own accord, checking on the herd, splitting wood for a fire that gave warmth but no cheer. Elias worked with a grim efficiency. He did what needed to be done. It was the only creed he had left. He did not ask for help, and he did not offer it. The ranch was his fortress and his prison, and the quiet was its warden. He was on the porch mending a bridle, the leather stiff and unyielding in his hands, when he saw the figure, a smudge of movement on the long, dusty road that led to his gate. It was unusual. Visitors were rare, and they usually came on horseback or in a wagon, not on foot. He stopped his work, his hands still. Blue, lying at his feet, let out a low growl, the hair on his neck rising. "Easy, boy," Elias murmured, his eyes narrowed against the afternoon sun. The figure grew clearer. A woman. She walked with a steady, unhurried pace, carrying a small valise. She did not look like she was lost. She looked like she knew exactly where she was going, even if Elias did not know why it was here. She stopped at his gate, setting down her bag. She looked at the house, at the barn, at the vast, empty sky above it. She seemed to be taking its measure. Elias felt, for the first time in a long time, a flicker of something other than weariness, curiosity. He did not move. He waited. It was her journey, her purpose. He would let her state it. After a moment, she opened the gate and walked up the path to the porch. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps in her mid-20s. Her face was plain, but composed, framed by brown hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her dress was worn but clean. There was no desperation in her eyes, only a kind of calm resolve. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. Blue was quiet now, but watchful. "Mr. Thorne?" she asked. Her voice was clear, low, and steady. He gave a short nod. "I am. My name is Clara May Thompson. I heard in town you might be in need of a housekeeper or a ranch hand. I can do both." Elias looked at her. He had not been to town in a month. He had not spoken to anyone about needing help. Mr. Abernathy at the general store must have been doing his usual speculating. Elias had let the place go, in ways. The mending pile in his basket was a testament to that. The dust in the parlor. He did not need help. He did not want help. Help meant another person. It meant noise. It meant breaking the quiet. "I'm not looking for help," he said. The words were flat, a statement of fact. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She simply held his gaze. "The fence is down on your north pasture," she said. "Your cattle are mixing with the Miller herd." Elias felt a prickle of irritation. He knew about the fence. He had planned to get to it tomorrow. "And," she continued, her gaze dropping to the bridle in his lap, "that stitching won't hold. The leather is too dry. It needs oiling first." Silence stretched between them. The sun beat down. A fly buzzed lazily past his ear. Elias looked at the woman, at her steady eyes and her capable, unadorned presence. She was not asking for charity. She was stating facts. She was demonstrating value before she had even been offered a wage. It was a language he understood better than words. He had not had a conversation this long with a stranger in years. He found he did not have the energy to send her away. Or perhaps it was something else. "I pay $2 a week plus board," he said, the words tasting strange in his mouth. "There's a room off the kitchen." "That's fair," she said without a hint of surprise or even relief. She picked up her valise. "Where's the oil for this leather?" And just like that, the quiet was broken. Clara May Thompson did not fill the house with chatter. She filled it with purpose. The sound of her footsteps was light but decisive. The smell of baking bread replaced the scent of dust and disuse. She rose before he did, and when he came into the kitchen, a cup of coffee was waiting for him on the table. One cup, next to his. He watched her. He was a man accustomed to observation, to reading the weather in the clouds, to seeing the health of a calf in the way it stood. He watched her now with that same quiet intensity. He watched her mend the fence in the north pasture. She did not ask for his help. He came upon her in the late afternoon, her sleeves rolled up, her face smudged with dirt. She worked with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful. She handled the wire and the post driver with a competence that spoke of long practice. He stood there for a long time, half hidden by a stand of aspen, just watching. He did not offer to help. He felt, strangely, that it would be an intrusion. He watched her with the chickens. She talked to them in a low, gentle voice as she scattered their feed, and the hens, who had always been skittish and wild with him, clucked and gathered around her skirts. He ate the meals she prepared. They were simple, hearty, stews and roasts and fresh bread. She never asked if he liked them. She simply put the food on the table, and he ate. He found he was eating more than he had in years. The food had flavor. The kitchen felt warm. One evening he came in from the barn, weary to his bones. The scent of soap and something savory met him at the door. On the kitchen table, his worn work shirt was laid out. The tear in the shoulder was gone, replaced by a line of neat, almost invisible stitches. Beside it, a plate of food was covered with another plate to keep it warm. He stood in the doorway, looking at the mended shirt. It was a small thing, a nothing thing. But the weight of it landed on him with unexpected force. Martha had mended his shirts. He had not let himself think of that in years. He had simply bought new ones when the old ones gave out, or worn them torn. He picked up the shirt. The fabric was soft. The stitches were perfect. He did not have to wear torn shirts. It had not occurred to him that he had a choice. Clara was nowhere to be seen. He assumed she had retired to her room. He ate the meal, the silence of the kitchen now feeling different. It was not empty. It was waiting. The next morning, when he came in for coffee, he gestured to the shirt, which he had folded and placed on the corner of the table. "Thank you," he said. She was at the stove, her back to him. She just nodded. "The button was loose, too. I fixed it." That was all. The conversation was over. But something had shifted. A line had been drawn and then erased. His trip to town became a source of low-grade dread. He knew what Mr. Abernathy would say. "Elias!" the storekeeper boomed as he entered, the bell on the door jangling. "Good to see you. Heard you got some help out at the place." Abernathy was a good man, but his curiosity was a force of nature. He leaned over the counter, his eyes twinkling. "A woman, they say. A young thing." Elias put his list on the counter. Flour, coffee, salt, nails. He did not answer. "Good worker, is she?" Abernathy persisted, measuring out coffee beans. "Folks are talking. Not every day a woman shows up on foot looking for that kind of work. Got a past, you figure?" "She mended the north pasture fence," Elias said, his voice flat. "Section S." Section Abernathy stopped, his scoop poised in midair. "The one the Miller boys couldn't fix right twice last summer?" Elias nodded. Abernathy slowly finished scooping the coffee. He looked at Elias, his expression changing from nosy to thoughtful. "Well," he said, his voice quieter, "a good fence is a good fence." He did not ask any more questions. The seasons began to turn. The green of summer deepened, then gave way to the gold and rust of autumn. The rhythm of the ranch changed, but for the first time it was a shared rhythm. They worked separately for most of the day, their tasks dividing them across the land. But they came together for meals. The silence at the dinner table was no longer a void. It was a comfortable space, filled with the unspoken understanding of a day's hard work done. Elias found himself learning the geography of Clara's moods, the way a sailor learns the sea. A certain tightness around her mouth meant she was tired. A quicker pace to her walk meant she was wrestling with a problem. A low hum, almost inaudible as she kneaded bread, meant she was content. He had not paid such close attention to another human being since Martha. The realization unsettled him. He was a man who had made his peace with being alone. He had not asked for this. He had not wanted this. But he did not want it to end. The thought was a betrayal of the quiet life he had so carefully constructed, a betrayal of Martha's memory. He felt a sharp, painful guilt. He had loved his wife. He still loved her. Having Clara here, feeling this contentment, it felt like he was erasing Martha, like he was papering over the past. He started pulling back. He took his meals on the porch. He found work at the far edges of the ranch, staying out until after dark. He made the quiet between them, strained again, empty. He could feel her watching him, her gaze steady and questioning, but she said nothing. She simply continued her work. The coffee was still on the table in the morning. The meals were still warm when he came in. His shirts were still mended. She was waiting. He did not know for what. One evening he was sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun bleed across the western sky. It was a spectacular sunset, all fire and bruised purple. Martha had loved the sunsets. She must have loved this view. The voice came from behind him. Clara was standing in the doorway, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Elias froze. It was as if she had reached into his mind and pulled out the very thought he was holding. He did not answer. He just stared at the mountains, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the step. She came out and sat on the top step, a few feet away from him. She did not try to fill the silence. She just sat with him, watching the last of the light fade from the sky. "My mother," she said, her voice soft, "used to say that a sunset was the day's way of keeping a promise, that no matter how hard the day was, the world would still give you something beautiful at the end of it." Elias thought of his days. Hard, yes, but beautiful? He had not thought of the world in those terms for a long time. "Your list for town," she said, changing the subject so smoothly it was almost seamless. "We're low on flour and salt, and the bay horse threw a shoe." He turned his head and looked at her in the gathering dusk. Her profile was calm, serene. She was not prying. She was not pushing. She was simply sharing the evening with him. She was talking about his wife and then about flour, all in the same breath. She was acknowledging the ghost in the house, and then she was getting on with the business of living. "I'll go in tomorrow," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I'll make a list," she said. She stood up and went back inside, leaving him alone with the stars and the new, more complicated quiet. He was not erasing Martha by letting this woman into his life. He was just living. And maybe, he thought, maybe that was the best way to honor a memory after all. What country are you listening from today? It's a question I think about often, sitting here in this dark room, sending my voice out into the ether. This story about a man in Montana in 1887 might be finding you in a city apartment in Japan, or on a farm in Brazil, or while you drive a truck across the Australian outback. It means everything to me to know where this voice is reaching. If you have a moment, I'd be grateful if you drop it in the comments below. It helps me feel connected to you, the way Elias and Clara were learning to connect, step by quiet step. Now let's get back to the story, because someone from Clara's past is about to arrive, and he is going to force Elias to figure out the difference between what is practical and what is precious. The arrival happened a week later. It was a Tuesday. Elias was fixing a trough near the barn, the rhythmic scrape of his file a familiar sound. Blue was dozing in a patch of sun. It was a peaceful, ordinary afternoon. Then came the sound of an unfamiliar horse and carriage. It was too fast, too confident for the rutted road. Elias straightened up, wiping his hands on his trousers. A fancy black buggy, pulled by a high-stepping chestnut, was coming up the lane. It was the kind of rig you saw in the city, not out here where function mattered more than polish. The buggy pulled to a stop in a cloud of dust. The man holding the reins was dressed in a fine wool suit and a bowler hat. He was handsome in a smooth, untested way. He looked at the ranch house, his expression a mixture of impatience and distaste. Elias felt an immediate, instinctive dislike for him. The man climbed down from the buggy. He moved with an easy arrogance, brushing dust from his sleeve as if it were a personal insult. "I'm looking for a woman," the man said, his voice loud, carrying too far in the still air. He did not look at Elias, but at the house. "Clara May Thompson. I was told she might be here." At that moment, the kitchen door opened. Clara stepped out, a basket of laundry in her arms. She saw the buggy and the man. She froze. The basket slipped from her grasp, spilling clean, folded linens into the dust. Her face, usually so composed, went pale. All the color drained from it, leaving her looking stark and vulnerable, and she whispered a single terrible phrase, so quiet Elias almost did not hear it. "You came back." The man, whose name Elias would learn was Lawrence Vance, smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was a smile of ownership. "Of course I came back, my dear. Did you really think you could just run off and I wouldn't find you?" Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He looked from Lawrence's smug face to Clara's stricken one. The story she had never told him was suddenly unfolding in his front yard. He began to do the arithmetic. Lawrence was young, probably close to Clara's age. He was prosperous, that was clear. He spoke of finding her as if it were his right. Elias looked down at his own calloused hands, at his worn boots covered in mud and manure. He was 52. His life was this ranch, this quiet, this past he could not shake. What could he offer a woman like Clara? A life of hard work and silence. A future with an old man. It was not a sensible choice for her. Lawrence Vance, for all his arrogance, was the sensible choice. The world would say so. Arithmetic would say so. Clara, my love, pack your things, Lawrence said, taking a step toward her. Your little adventure is over. We're going home. Clara did not move. She stood rooted to the spot, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. Blue, who had been silent until now, got to his feet. A low, menacing growl rumbled in his chest. He stood between Clara and the stranger, his body tense. Call off your dog, Lawrence snapped, his composure cracking slightly. Elias did not move. He did not speak. He just watched. This was Clara's fight. He had no right to interfere. He was just the employer, a bystander. That was the sensible thing to believe. I am not your love, Clara said, her voice regaining a sliver of its usual strength. And this is my home. Lawrence laughed. It was a condescending sound. This dirt patch at the end of the world, don't be ridiculous. Your father has already agreed. The arrangements are made. Arrangements. The word hung in the air, cold and final. It spoke of contracts and obligations, of lives bought and sold. A young voice cut through the tension. His boots have never seen mud. Elias turned. Sam, the Miller boy from the neighboring ranch, was perched on the top rail of the corral fence. He must have cut across the pasture. He was a boy of 10, with an unvarnished honesty that adults often lost. Lawrence Vance ignored him. Elias did not. The boy was right. The man's boots were polished leather suitable for city sidewalks. They knew nothing of the land, of the pre-dawn chill, of the satisfaction of a well-mended fence. They were the boots of a man who owned things, not a man who built them. Elias looked at Clara. He saw the terror in her eyes, but beneath it, he saw the same resolve he had seen the day she arrived. She had run from this man, from this life. She had come here, seeking not just a job, but refuge. And he, in his cautious, wounded heart, had been about to let this man take her away. He had been counting years, counting dollars. He had been doing the wrong arithmetic. The boy had counted the boots. Clara's value was not in her youth or her looks. It was in her character, in the steady competence of her hands, in the quiet courage that had brought her here and that was holding her here now in the face of this man. Her value was in the way she mended a shirt and in the way she acknowledged a ghost without fear. That kind of value could not be calculated. It could only be recognized and cherished. Elias took a step forward. It was not a large step, but it changed the geography of the scene. He was no longer a bystander. He was standing with her. Blue moved to stand beside him, the growl subsiding to a watchful stillness. The lady said this is her home, Elias said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of the mountains behind him. I reckon that settles it. Lawrence Vance finally turned his full attention to Elias. He looked him up and down, taking in the worn clothes, the age in his face. A smirk played on his lips. And who are you? He asked, contempt dripping from every word. The hired help? I'm the man who owns the land she's standing on, Elias said, his voice level. And you're trespassing. The air crackled. It was a declaration, a line drawn not in the dust, but in the heart of things. Lawrence's face hardened. She is promised to me. Her father. I am not a parcel to be traded, Clara cut in, her voice ringing with a newfound clarity. She took a step, coming to stand beside Elias. She bent down and began to pick up the scattered linens, a simple domestic act that was, in itself, a profound statement. She was not leaving. She was cleaning up a mess. I made a life for myself here, a good life. She looked at Elias then, a quick, fleeting glance, but in it he saw everything, gratitude, hope, and a question. Lawrence saw it too, his face flushed with anger. You would choose this ruin of a man, this empty land, over me? I choose peace, Clara said softly. I choose work that means something. I choose a man who knows the difference between a new shirt and a mended one. It was a language Lawrence Vance could not understand. He saw only a grubby old man and a stubborn woman. He saw a bad investment. You'll regret this, he snarled, but the threat was hollow. He had already lost. He stalked back to his buggy, yanking the reins so hard the chestnut shied. You'll come crawling back, he shouted as he turned the carriage with a reckless spray of gravel. Then he was gone, a cloud of angry dust on the road back to a world that had no place here. Silence descended again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet after a storm. The air was clean. Sam, the Miller boy, hopped off the fence. Good dog, he said, patting Blue's head. Then he looked at Elias. You gonna marry her? The bluntness of the question was startling. Clara, who was still gathering the linens, froze. Elias felt a slow heat rise in his neck. He looked at Clara, at her bent head, the vulnerable line of her neck. He had stood up for her. He had claimed her as part of his home, but he had not thought beyond that moment. He had not dared to. Go on home, Sam, he said, his voice gentle. Your pa will be looking for you. The boy shrugged. All right, but you should. She makes good cookies. And with that piece of wisdom, he sauntered off toward the pasture. Elias and Clara were alone. The linens were all back in the basket. She stood, holding it, not looking at him. The air was thick with things unsaid. He had chased off her past. He had, in front of witnesses, declared his position. Now what? He walked over to her. He reached out and took the laundry basket from her hands, setting it on the porch. His hand brushed hers. Her skin was warm. He's gone, Elias said. It was a stupid thing to say. Obvious. I know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She was looking at the ground. He knew he had to say more. He had to bridge the gap between what he had done and what he felt. The arithmetic of doubt was gone, replaced by the terrifying, simple value of the woman standing before him. He was still 52. He was still a man shaped by loss, but he was also a man who had just been reminded how to stand for something, for someone. Clara, he began, and then stopped. He did not have the words. He was a man of action, of fences and fields. So he acted. He took her hand. It was small in his and trembled slightly. He led her to the porch and sat on the steps, pulling her down gently beside him. He did not let go of her hand. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen. This ranch, he said finally, his voice rough. He was looking at the mountains the same way he had that other evening. It's too much for one person. She said nothing. Her hand was still in his. I'm not looking for a housekeeper anymore, Clara, he continued, the words coming slow and hard, like pulling stones from a field. And I'm not looking for a ranch hand. He turned to look at her. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears. This place needs a partner, not just for the work, for the quiet, for the sunsets. He took a breath. I was hoping it would be you. It was not a proposal of marriage, not in the way the world understood it. It was something more fundamental, an offering of a shared life, a partnership of soul and soil. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the dust on her cheek. She squeezed his hand. I know, she said. And then, after a moment, she added, I was hoping you'd ask. The next day, they rode into town together in the farm wagon. They did not go to the preacher. They went to the courthouse. Elias had the deed to the ranch in his pocket. He had sat up late the night before, by the light of a single lamp, and with a pen and ink had added her name, Clara May Thompson, partner. Mr. Abernathy saw them from the doorway of his store. He watched them walk up the steps of the courthouse, Elias tall and solemn, Clara walking beside him, her head held high. He saw them come out 20 minutes later. Nothing looked different, but everything was. Elias and Clara stopped at the general store on their way out of town. Elias placed a list on the counter. It was in Clara's neat handwriting: flour, salt, sugar, 2 new china cups, and a length of blue ribbon. Abernathy filled the order without a word. As he handed the package to Elias, he looked him square in the eye. He nodded once, a gesture of respect, of understanding. The community had rendered its verdict, and it was approval. A year passed. The ranch thrived. The house was no longer quiet. It was filled with a gentle hum of life. There was laughter sometimes, soft and surprising. The parlor doors were open, the room aired out and clean, with a vase of wildflowers on the mantel. The number of cattle grew. A new wing was added to the barn. The fences were all in good repair. One evening in the late summer, Elias and Clara sat on the porch steps just as they had that day a year ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky in strokes of fire and gold. Blue was at their feet, his head resting on Elias's boot. Clara was mending a shirt. Elias was whittling a small figure of a horse from a piece of scrap wood. The silence between them was as comfortable and familiar as a well-worn blanket. "Do you remember that first day?" Elias asked, his voice a low rumble. Clara smiled without looking up from her work. "You were a very grumpy man." "I was a man who had stopped expecting things," he corrected gently. "And now?" she asked, her needle pausing. He looked at her. Her hair was a little softer now, a few stray wisps escaping her bun. There were laugh lines around her eyes that had not been there a year ago. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His rough fingers were surprisingly gentle. "Now," he said, "I get up every morning expecting coffee, and I am never disappointed." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her, and they sat there together, partners, watching the day keep its promise. The quiet was at long last peace. It is a funny thing, arithmetic. We spend so much of our lives counting years, counting dollars, counting heartbreaks. Elias Thorne was a man who had been defeated by arithmetic. The equation of his life, 1 minus 1 minus 1, left him with 0. He looked at his age, a man of 52, and he saw only a subtraction, a lessening of days, a closing of accounts. He looked at Clara, a woman in her 20s, and the numbers screamed at him. Inappropriate, unsensible, impossible. The world encourages this kind of math. It is the logic of the marketplace, the cold calculation of gain and loss. Lawrence Vance was a man who lived by this arithmetic. He saw Clara as an asset, a thing to be acquired, an arrangement to be fulfilled. He saw Elias as a liability, a worthless old man standing in the way of his profit. His boots, as the boy Sam so wisely noted, were clean. They had never touched the real messy, fertile ground of living. But there is another way to count. It is a way of counting that has less to do with numbers and more to do with value. The Miller boy did not calculate the age difference. He saw the boots. He weighed the character of the man wearing them and found it wanting. Clara did not see an old man. She saw a man who understood the worth of a mended shirt, a man who would stand with her, a man whose quiet was a sign of depth, not emptiness. She saw value. Elias's healing began when he decided to stop counting years and start weighing worth. He had to learn a new kind of mathematics, the kind where 1 plus 1 does not equal 2, but equals a home. It is the kind of math where the value of a shared sunset is infinite, and the cost of a past sorrow is finally paid in full by a present joy. He learned that a house is just wood and nails, but a home is a place where someone is waiting for you, where a cup of coffee is a promise, and where the quiet is not an absence but a presence, a shared and sacred peace. Thank you for your time and your attention. In a world that is so often loud and demanding, your willingness to sit with a quiet story is a gift. It is that gift, your attention, that keeps this channel going, that allows these stories to be told. I hope that wherever you are, whatever battles you are facing, you find someone who sees your true value and that you have the courage to see theirs. Until we meet again here in the quiet, I wish you all the best. Take care.